In ancient times, there existed in the Middle East, on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, which now belongs to Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, a civilization that was developed and widely known in the region. It had a considerable influence on the development of the culture of the ancient Greeks, whose achievements were assimilated and perfected by the Romans, on whose science and social culture a pan-European civilization had already emerged. The most important invention of this ancient civilization is alphabetical writing, from which the Arabic, Greek, and Latin alphabets evolved. The latter is still in use in most countries of the world. At the same time, this civilization, whose achievements to a large extent influenced the historical development of all mankind, left very little information about it to historians. Most of the researchers know about it from the surviving ancient Greek descriptions. Even exactly when it arose is very difficult to say. We are talking about Phoenicia, repeatedly mentioned in the Bible. The name Phoenicia is probably of Greek origin from the word purple, which may be related to the purple dye that Phoenician merchants supplied to ancient Greece. What the Phoenicians called themselves is unknown, but it is known that at the time of their contacts with the Greeks, they spoke a language of the Semitic group, like the Arabs, Jews, ancient Babylonians, and Assyrians. There is also the version that originally the ancestors of the Phoenicians spoke a different language, but later adopted a Semitic accentuated by the active migration to their lands of the Semitic tribes, with whom they intermarried. Anthropological studies of the remains of the Phoenicians and a comparison with the surviving ancient images show that they were short, elongated, with elongated face, elongated eyes, thick and straight nose, curly hair, and short cropped or curly beard. According to sources of ancient Egypt, Semitic tribes have appeared on east coast of Mediterranean Sea in II millennium BC, from where ancestors of Phoenicians have come. It is not known, there are only assumptions. The Greek geographer Strabo pointed out that they came from the islands of Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. The territory of Phoenicia stretched in a narrow strip along the Mediterranean coast, covering only the valleys easily irrigated by the rivers flowing from the Lebanese mountains. The basis of Phoenicia's wealth and prosperity was its maritime trade. The Phoenicians had no equal in the art of seamanship in prehistoric times. It was they who invented the famous elongated sailing and rowing vessels of ancient civilizations, which the ancient Greeks then adopted from them. The Greeks, having learned seafaring from the Phoenicians, subsequently developed this art themselves to advanced heights, and by means of it for a long time became the dominant power throughout the Mediterranean. The mountains of Phoenicia were abundant with mighty Lebanese cedars, so that the Phoenicians had no shortage of material for building ships. Around 1500 BC, Phoenician sailors were even able to sail into the Atlantic Ocean and reach the Canary Islands. Phoenician villagers were active in horticulture in the fertile irrigated valleys and grew olives, dates, and grapes. The coastal inhabitants were engaged in fishing, and urban craftsmen made expensive wool and silk fabrics, ebony, ivory, and metal goods. The Phoenicians extracted purple dye from the shells of sea mollusks and used it to dye cloth. The religion of the Phoenicians was dominated by cults common to the Semitic peoples of the time. Bel was worshipped as the supreme god and Astarte as the feminine element. A pantheon of other deities was also worshipped. In bad years, babies were sacrificed to Baal to propitiate him. Researchers believe that this was a form of infanticide camouflaged as a solemn religious ceremony, which occurred in many ancient peoples, killing children so that there would be no more eaters. The religious rites were directed by priests, who were a particularly venerated stratum of the city. On the sea, the Phoenicians kept absolute domination for a long time. They not only traded peacefully, but also pirated, and sometimes the Phoenician merchants themselves attacked each other's ships to get hold of other merchandise. It is believed that it was they who invented the battering ram, an underwater ledge in the bow of the ship, which, when approached, would pierce the side of the enemy vessel. From the sea, the Phoenicians faced no threat, but from the east, they were protected by mountains against their powerful neighbors, Babylon and Assyria. The mountains, which strongly partitioned the inhabited regions along the coast, also contributed to the considerable isolation of Phoenician societies from one another. Little is known about the political organization of Phoenicia, and it is generally accepted that Phoenicia was not a single state, but a group of independent and semi-independent cities to which the rural population lived in the area was subordinated. Cities were united temporarily only to accomplish some common goals: defense against enemies, managing an irrigation system. Often cities competed with each other for the greatest influence in the region. In the second millennium BC, Egypt conquered Syria, neighboring Phoenicia. Although the Egyptian army had difficulty passing through the Lebanese mountains, the Egyptians began to exert a strong political and economic influence over Phoenicia. Several times the Phoenician city of Tyre was even ruled by Egyptian proxies. Repeatedly the Phoenicians revolted in an attempt to get rid of the intrusive Egyptian control. From the 14th century, the Phoenician cities began to form alliances with the Hittites against Egypt. During the following centuries, due to the decline of Egyptian influence, they gradually became independent. In the 10th centuries BC, the Phoenician civilization flourished. The cities of Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre reached the greatest wealth and influence. Sidon seems to have been especially rich and famous, for the Israelites and Greeks often called all the Phoenicians Sidonians. It still exists today as the Arab city of Sidon on the coast of South Lebanon. There was the main Phoenician sanctuary, the Temple of Astarte, the goddess of love and power. In the 10th century BC, another city, Tyre, was at the forefront of the political and economic life of Phoenicia. At this time, Phoenicia was actually united into one power. All or almost all other cities, including Sidon, recognized its hegemony. King Hiram of Tyre made an alliance with the kingdom of Judea, from where bread, oil, and wine began to be supplied to Phoenicia in exchange for building timber for the palaces. During this period, the Phoenicians were particularly active in exploring new lands. In their large and sturdy ships, their groups sailed far off, landed in suitable places on the Mediterranean coast, sometimes thousands of miles from their native land, and founded new settlements that gradually grew into colonial cities. Phoenician colonies spread practically along the entire Mediterranean coast, especially on the islands of Cyprus, Corsica, Crete, Malta, Sicily, and Sardinia. But the largest Phoenician colony was Carthage, Carthage, founded in the 8th century BC by settlers from Tyre itself at a place where the North African coast comes closest to the southern coast of Sicily, the territory of modern Tunisia. Carthage, conducting an active trade with the tribes of Africa and Italy, after a while became richer than all the cities of the original Phoenician territory and itself existed much longer than Phoenicia as such. During the same period, when the natives of Tyre were laying Carthage far to the west, Phoenicia itself was invaded by the troops of aggressive Assyria. Once again, the independence of its cities was shaken, and the Phoenicians had to pay tribute to Assyria. The ongoing rivalry between the cities was also an obstacle to their freedom from Assyrian political domination. Subsequently, the Assyrian attacks were replaced by Babylonian attacks, followed by a period of independence. Finally, in 538, Phoenicia was conquered by the Persians. Under the Persians, for the first time, a unified system of government was built, uniting all the cities. In 332, Alexander the Great, who was conquering the Persian Empire, also conquered Phoenicia, and his troops destroyed the city of Tyre. These events are considered to be the end of the Phoenician identity. The local population actively adopted the Hellenic culture, which had been stimulated in ancient times by the Phoenicians themselves. Now Greek civilization has far outpaced them in the cultural and political development. Gradually, the descendants of the ancient Phoenicians, both on the east coast of the Mediterranean Sea and in the former Phoenician colonies, forgot both their ancient language and their origins, dissolving among the other peoples of the Mediterranean. However, genetic studies show that the Phoenician genotype has been preserved in a significant part of the modern population of the Mediterranean coast. On the island of Malta, for example, up to 1/3 of all inhabitants are descendants of the Phoenicians.